do this. That so when you look at exchange rate, currently, if you look at the exchange rate right now that is seen in the newspaper, $1 is equal to rupees 150. Isn't that true? Or 153 or 152 or something like that. Now, this is what we call a nominal exchange rate. The exchange rate, which is quoted, is simply the nominal exchange rate, which is uh, the one that is found in newspapers and so on and so forth, and it's the one that is commonly used, and this is the one that can affect the transaction price of goods and services. So when the one which is the quoted exchange rate in newspapers are basically what we call a nominal exchange rate. Nominal means it does not um, account for inflation. It doesn't account for inflation. Makes sense? But guys, if this was a real effective exchange rate, then this is basically an exchange rate that is adjusted for adjusted for price level or price level or inflation. So the transaction price are not only affected by changes in the exchange rate, they're also affected by differences in inflation rate between trading countries. So when you look at inflation, what does inflation do? We know this, that if the price goes up, right, exports become expensive and imports become cheaper. So let's say inflation is happening 10%. Okay, let me choose another color. If inflation is 10%, right, and exchange rate is going down by 10% as well. Remember, exchange rate goes down, exports become, or rather, exchange rate goes, let's say, up. So if exchange rate goes up by 10%, exports become expensive and imports will become relatively cheaper. Now, guys, look at this, what is happening. If the inflation happens, it will make our exports expensive, right? If this, by the way, should be going down, exports become, uh, yeah, exports become expensive, imports become cheaper, right? I wanted to actually do something else. I wanted to make the exchange rate go down. If exchange rate goes down, exports become cheaper and imports become expensive. So look at this. If price is going up by 10% and exchange rate is going down by 10%, both these effects are in the opposite direction, because the first effect, the inflation, is going to make our exports expensive, while your exchange rate is going to make our exports cheaper. And because they are of the same magnitude, if somebody asks you what happens to your um, real, which is taking it out price change, effective exchange rate, and the answer is that it won't change. Why would it not change? Because inflation is making things expensive. So the transaction price are not only affected by changes in exchange rate, they're also affected by differences in inflation rate between trading countries. As a result, changes in real value are calculated through real effective exchange rate. So if you want to find out how inflation is affecting us or our exports and imports, you're going to need to look at both exchange rate and inflation, which is just for exchange rate to take into account the relative rates of inflation. And we believe that this is the most effective way to figure out whether the country is competitive or not. Now, so look at this. If the price of a bed is £10 and the exchange rate is 1:4, okay, price is £10 right now. Then the US bed becomes $40, right? Because £10, right, times £10 times, for example, $4. Every pound is for $4, which would mean the bat is for $40 if it goes to the US, right? Now, if the exchange rate becomes £1 is equal to $2, this price will become um, £10 into $2 or $20. So exports are becoming cheaper because the exchange rate pound is becoming weaker. So exchange rate is going down. But what if inflation takes place that causes the price to double? So this 10 pound become, for example, 20 pound again because of inflation. So 20 pound times 2, you will see the dollar price will remain $40. Does that make sense? So in this case also, what I'm trying to show you is this, that the exchange rate and inflation are of the same magnitude. The price of exports is not changing. Yeah. So like if inflation is going up by 10%, price goes up by 10%. Exchange rate goes down by 10%, price goes down. Net effect, no change in the price of exports. So real effective exchange rate basically is a useful one because it takes into account both these factors. Does that make sense, guys? Any questions about this? Hania or Adam or anyone? Any questions, guys? Okay, moving on. We move on to talk about now the trade weighted exchange rate. What is a trade weighted exchange rate? So, a trade weighted exchange rate is another exchange rate that sometimes countries are looking at. And they try to look at how the trade is happening with the trading partners, and they assign weights accordingly. So, for example, uh, if there is a country X, okay, which undertakes 9 times as much trade with the US than with Japan. So if you look at country X, right, country X is trading with Japan and US, and we with US the percentage of trade is 90%. With Japan, it's 10%. Okay, so I gave weights according to the volume of trade. Now, let's say with US, your exchange rate is going up by 5%, while with Japan, the exchange rate is going up by 50%. Okay, so what is your overall exchange rate change? Okay, if you want to find out, the way you're going to do this is this, that in a trade weighted exchange rate, if US is more important than Japan because you do 90% of trade with US, then the change in exchange rate, this is by the way exchange rate change for each country, and this is your uh, weights. So you can see this, the country X relies heavily on trade with Japan. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to multiply weight, which is 0.1, times 50%, plus US, which is 0.9, times 5%. And if I do that, 0.1 times 50% is, anyone? 10%, right? And 0.9 times 5% is 45%, right? So 9 times 5 is 45.45, or 4.5% in short. Make sense? So this becomes 14.5%. How much is the exchange rate changing by? And the answer is by 14.5%. Make sense? Although it looks like Japan ke saath exchange rate is like 50%, but you're going to look at what we call the trade weighted exchange rate. So in this method, you assign different weight to different countries according to their relative importance. If Japan is, or if US is 9 times more important than Japan, the weights will be 90 and 10 and so on. Got it? Are we good? Do we get this example, guys? And these, by the way, how do they get tested in exam? They all come in our MCQs. So guys, this is all MCQ stuff. And I'm going to show you this in a little while. Are we good to move on? Okay, now comes something called purchasing power parity rate. Uh, what's the purchasing power parity rate? Purchasing power parity rate basically is that uh, a rate at which is basically looking at purchasing power. So, you know, a good exercise to look at is basically called the Big Macs. There's something called a Big Mac index. You know, when you if you look at the price of Big Macs, let's say in Pakistan versus in US versus in Japan versus in, for example, South Africa, you find out the Big Mac price and you find out how much is the Big Mac for. So if I just Google very quickly and I write, for example, Big Mac price in US, Big Mac price in US, the answer is it's $3.99. But if I find out the Big Mac price in Pakistan, it's not coming. But anyone who eats Big Mac can tell me what's the Big Mac price in Pakistan? Okay, wait. I found the menu. Anyone who can tell me Big Mac price in Pakistan? Just the Big Mac. No, no Big Mac eater here. Everyone is quiet. Are you guys Googling as well? It's like me. I found it. Okay, it's 531, guys. 531. Now this is very interesting. So if you look at rupees 531 to one, yeah, 531. If you do the math, guys, 531 is to 3.99. What is $1 equal to? What is $1 equal to? Anyone, guys? So 3.99 of 531 divided by 3.99, it's 133 rupees. 133 is equal to $1. Now, what is the exchange rate in Pakistan right now, guys? If the exchange rate just as we look at it, uh, USD to PKR, and we know this exchange rate has become favorable recently. It's rupees 152 is equal to $1. Are you all with me? What have I done is basically something called purchasing power parity rate. Now, this is the rate which is taking into account how much a Big Mac will cost in Pakistan. And this is what we call the nominal exchange rate. Sometimes the nominal exchange rate is more than or it's less than or more than, depending on the country you're looking at, than the exchange rate, primarily because exchange rate does not take into account purchasing power parity. Purchasing power parity rate is a rate of exchange that will allow a given amount of money in one country to buy the same amount of. So if you have a dollar, right, and if you or if you have 133 rupees, roughly, if you go to the US, that will give you a $1 worth of good. Make sense? So, given amount of money in one country to buy the same amount of goods in another country after exchanging it into the currency of the other country. It is exchange rate which is corrected to take into account the cost of living. If you look at Big Mac is cheaper to make in Pakistan, guys, uh, and that's why while we believe that currently the exchange rate is $1 is equal to 152, this exchange rate does not take into account the fact that a lot of goods in Pakistan are much cheaper. Rupee ideally should be roughly 133 rather than 152. And in fact, if you ask me the value of rupee, I mean, it should be more stronger. But hota ye hai, what happens actually is this that, and by the way, this number was like 160 something few days back, um, but it should be around this. And we can look at, so what happens is basically we create a basket of goods. Okay, We create a basket of goods and we find out the price of those basket of goods. So these are the items in the basket. We find those basket of goods in the UK, in Pakistan, Japan, South Africa, and we find out how much is this basket for. And that basket of goods, which is the same goods probably, once we figure out the price, that becomes my exchange rate. And we use this exchange rate whenever we are basically comparing two countries. For example, if you want to compare GDP of Pakistan and US, the one that is commonly seen online is what we call purchasing power parity rate adjusted. So it's called the purchasing power parity rate adjusted to take into account the purchasing power. And Big Mac index, by the way, is actually a very cool uh, way to figure out what the purchasing power of different countries are. If you look at Big Mac price in India, that's a good one also to look at. If you look at Big Mac price in India, Big Mac, Big Mac price in India. Oh, Big Mac is beef. I don't know whether Big Mac will be available in India. Sorry. Yes. Maybe maybe they might not have the right kind of comparison to do. Anyways, so moving on, guys. I just realized Big Mac is beef, and beef may not be sold in India in the outlets. Anyways, so moving on, guys. So do we get the idea of what our purchasing power parity rate is? Any questions about purchasing power parity rate? If we are sorted, then I want to show you some questions. Okay, so this is going to be interesting to see some questions on the things that we just learned. I don't think we have time for data response. I'm going to be announcing an extra class for data responses just for you guys to practice. Okay. Okay, guys, what determines the purchasing power parity of a currency? Anyone? What determines the purchasing power parity of a currency? A, good job. It's the cost of living, relative cost of living. Exactly. Cost of living is your purchasing power parity. Good job. What about number 23? With an exchange rate of 5 Egyptian pound is equal to 1 US dollar, an American product sells uh, for 100 Egyptian dollars. So what's the US price for this good? And I'll say this, that if 100 Egyptian pound will be if 5 is equal to 1, 100 will be equal to 100 divided by 5, or how much will that be? 100 divided by 5 will be 20. Isn't that true? Assuming that the dollar price remains unchanged, what will be the price in Egypt if the Egyptian pound appreciate to 4 EGP is equal to $1? Guys, 4 EGP is equal to $1. If the exchange rate goes to 4 EGP is equal to $1, the price will become 20 times, good job, Hania, 20 times 4 or 80. Yeah, makes sense? It's easy. Does that make sense? Anyone? Are we good? Awesome. One more question to do with what we've learned right now. What is a real exchange rate? What is a real exchange rate? Guys, remember, real means controlling for inflation. So where do you see that to be the answer? C, good job. It is C, where you are removing the price inflation or controlling for price inflation or taking into account price inflation. Make sense? So C is the right answer. Make sense? By the way, A is, what is A? This is nominal exchange rate. Make sense? And this is trade weighted exchange rate. Okay. Okay, this one is a nice one as well. Country X conducts 60% of its trade with country Y. So country X is doing 60% with country Y and 40% with country Z. So country Y and country Z. Okay. What will be the new trade weighted exchange rate if the currency rises in value by 20%? This is plus 20%, and this is plus, or this is, and falls by minus 10% and falls by 10% against the currency of Z. So guys, how do we find this? Remember, this is trade weighted exchange rate. So I'm going to do this 0.6 times 20% plus 0.4 times minus 10%. So that will be the exchange rate, or it will become 0.6 times 0.20% is 6 to the 12, 12%, plus 4 times 10% is minus 4%, minus 4%, which will become 12 minus 4 is 8%. And if it's an index, the value has gone from 100 to 108. Exactly. So C will be the answer. Make sense? You guys agree with me with this one? Does that make sense, guys? Awesome. So this is what we've done the examples for all the different kinds that we see, right? Any questions before we end the class? Are we good to end the class? Thank you, guys. Have a good one. I will be sharing information about the some extra classes before the mocks. The mocks is on the 10th. We have some days, so we'll keep some extra classes only for practice of exam questions, okay? So I'll let you know about that information. Thank you, Shayan. Thank you. I just have sore throat, so I think I will be fine. Have a good one, guys. Take care. Bye bye.